Welcome to Psychology and You, brought to you by the New York State Psychological Association. The New York State Psychological Association is a private, nonprofit professional association chartered more than 50 years ago. Its mission is to advance the science and practice of psychology while supporting excellence in education, training, research, advocacy, and service. With more than 3,000 members, NYSPA is recognized as one of the strongest state psychological associations in the country because of its vigorous and sustained efforts in many areas of concern to psychologists and the public interest. This podcast, Psychology and You, will follow the New York State Psychological Association's long-standing tradition of providing both the public and professionals with the most informative and expert information the field of psychology has to offer. And here is your host for today's show.
Hello, this is Dr. Howard Gurr, your host for this episode of Psychology and You, the podcast of the New York State Psychological Association. Today's podcast is on the unique psychological needs and issues of the Latino community. My guest for today is Felicitas Kort, a Venezuelan psychologist. Before we meet her, let me tell you about her. Felicitas Kort moved to New York City about a year ago. She was originally from Venezuela, where she was a professor of behavior and cognitive therapy in Caracas, Venezuela, Central University, and an experienced clinician of behavior and cognitive therapy. While in Venezuela, Felicitas produced and hosted her own radio talk show for 6 years called Habits and Inhabitants. On her show, she interviewed professionals, families, youth, and children with the purpose of disseminating information about various disorders, treatment, and prevention. Besides her own show, she was frequently interviewed by print and TV and radio in Venezuela. Felicitas was awarded a grant by the USA Agency for International Development for the project entitled A Truce for Venezuelans, a preliminary program for the prevention of violence, which also included 12 radio programs and 4 TV spots. In addition, Felicitas published 6 books in Spanish on mental health, including Manual of Emotions, Introduction to Behavior and Cognitive Therapy, Behavior Therapy for Children, Behavior Therapy Techniques, Clinical Behavior Therapy, and Group Psychotherapy. Of course, the titles were in Spanish, but I don't speak Spanish, so I gave you the English titles. Felicitas is an associate member of the American Psychological Association, associate member of the New York State Psychological Association, international member of the Association for the Advancement of Behavior and Cognitive Therapies in New York, president of the Venezuelan Association of Behavior Therapy, chairman of the board of the Venezuelan Association of Psychotherapy, the ex-vice president of the Latin American Association of Analysis and Behavior Modification in Peru, and a member of the Venezuelan Federation of Psychologists, Venezuela International. And now, let's meet Felicitas Kort.
Felicitas, welcome to Psychology and You, the New York State Psychological Association podcast.
Hi, how are you?
Great. And today, as I mentioned in my intro, we're going to be talking about mental health issues within the Latino community and the perception of mental health services and how that's changing and what are the major issues within the Latino community. So my first question, Felicitas, would be, what are the major issues relevant to the Latino community?
Well, you know, Howie, it's very important to take into account the Latino community. It involves a lot of groups. Like there are 3 large Hispanic population groups, which are the Mexican, the Puerto Rican, and the Cuban. And then there is a second emerging subgroups, which include the Dominicans, the South Americans, and Central Americans. And I'm surprised to read that the South Americans, you know, they're very, it is important to know that it's not the same a Venezuelan, than a Brazilian, than a person from Uruguay or Argentina. So I think I would suggest to get, we have to get more information on the characteristics of those different populations because they are quite different. In that sense, so we can't put all the Hispanic population into one basket. They have different characteristics. And one of their main issues is when they come to the U.S. is what they call the acculturation. When they adapt, they have to get to know the mores and the norms of the U.S. That many times they do very well. It's in regard to contact with people and then some conflicts of adaptation come. And finally, there is a lot of what I've perceived. There's hope when you come to the U.S. because you have, all kinds of ideals and things that you want to achieve and coming to, and make it happen. But like I say, then when you analyze what kind of issues, the American Psychological Association made an important survey in America, and they studied the stress and they define it as an emotional experience, obviously that is accompanied by physical and behavioral and also biochemical reactions. But when you analyze stress, it can go in different ways. And in the Latino population, for example, as what I know from my part from Venezuela, for example, heart disease is one of the it's very high up in the health issues, and heart disease is related to anger. I don't know the statistics in the U.S. in regard to that, but I do know that in the U.S., for example, for adolescents, suicide is very high. For adolescent Latinos, suicide is a very high rate. Latino women get more double depression than men, and that can lead to suicide attempts. And at the end, as you know, suicide is a form of anger towards yourself. So we're dealing with, it needs a lot of information on how to deal with the anger management and different suggestions on how to, not only suggestions, but ways of really avoiding such severe reactions.
Now, I understand that it's not possible to lump all the Latino communities together because of the fact that they're from, different parts of the world, different countries, have different cultures and different practices. But is it possible to find or indicate whether there are maybe specific problems to Latino communities that may not be found as frequently in other populations?
Yes, for example, it's very good, your question. You know that, of course, APA, the American Psychological Association, is running a whole campaign of which we're both part of the mind and body. Right. Well, for the Latino, mind and body is the same thing. It's a holistic view of estar sano means to be healthy. And to be healthy, you can be healthy both physically and mentally. And so they don't have that dichotomy, it's not seen like that. So that's one important difference. Also that there are some issues that Hispanic give a lot of importance, which is the issue of respect. Respeto means that for respeto you can, in many countries, you can get a lot of violence because one adolescent doesn't respect the other one. It's a whole culture of respect. And also in the Latinos, the community, there is also the glorification of leaders, which has happened in many countries of Latin America. This is called like personalismo, where you really follow one leader and that you glorify it, and he's the savior of all the ailments of the country. And also the family. Family is very, very important. They call it familismo. And for example, in Venezuela, where I can really talk about that, it's we have a matriarchal society that basically the relation is mother-son, not the couple. There is a high percentage of partners that live together and they're not married. And the important thing is the mother. She is the one, she's the authority in the culture of the Venezuelan culture. So that changes entirely the view of focusing on the family as we see it, or you see it in the West.
Do you find anger management and violence issues more prevalent in Latino populations?
Well, I think it's violence is ubiquitous. I mean, it's an epidemic, and it travels very well in all languages. What I think the reason that maybe we see it's more obvious the violence in the Latino populations is because we've some soap operas that unfortunately still stimulate the trigger for for anger, the expression of anger. And not only that, because you cannot say it's only the soap operas, but you can also talk about the whole culture, both U.S. and it's very generalized to use all kinds of video games, and if we get into that realm, you will see that it's not only one cause of violence, but it's more pertinent when you see it. It's more obvious when you see it, like every day. Also, in our, at least in my country, you see that main leaders have expressions of a lot of anger, and that we have said, our psychologists say it over and over, that you learn anger, 80% of the anger that you see, you learn it. And there is a percentage, of course, related to personality disorders or some biochemical imbalance, but like 80% or more is related to learning. So if we have anti-heroes, people that for hours and hours relate in a very angry way, so you can imagine what kind of a population we will get, because this is what it's being taught. And also the fact of bullying, I see that you also have it in the U.S. APA had a resolution in 2004 about bullying, and bullying is one form of violence. I mean, if we see violence as in a continuum, bullying is part of that continuum, and I'm very happy that at least the American Psychological Association is, that you can reach out and read it in Spanish and in English, what to do about bullying, how to manage anger. Our program doesn't allow to talk about this, but even how to deal with a child, how to teach tenderness in a home. And this is all the work of, the campaigns that you've been doing. Unfortunately, the big difference is that in countries like Venezuela, there is nothing like that you can reach out or hear or, get hold of. And I think pretty much it happens in other countries in South America, which I don't dare to say which exactly, but I would say, for example, Chile is not like that, but maybe the others, yes, and I don't know the exact programs they have. But it is quite generalized that many, there are barriers for treatment. In APA, they had a survey a few years ago, and they found out that only 1% of the psychologists that are clinical active in APA, only 1% are Latino, and therefore when Latino reach out to get treatment, there is a language barrier. There's, it's not so, when you do psychotherapy, particularly to a Latin-speaking, Spanish-speaking person, it's very important that connection in when you speak Spanish one to another. And this is one, in one direction that, fortunately for me, it's excellent, but not for the population in the U.S., because you need many more, let's say, mental health, say, help in that area in order to understand the different little details that make a culture of the Latino groups.
Just want to remind the audience, this is Dr. Howard Gurr for Psychology and You, the New York State Psychological Association podcast, and I'm talking to Felicitas Kort about mental health in the Latino community and specific issues that the Latino community might have in the areas of mental health and emotional difficulties. Felicitas, you mentioned earlier that only 1% of the members of the American Psychological Association are of Latino descent or are Hispanic.
I say, I don't know the latest statistics. I would please correct me if I'm wrong, is because there is a lot of information out there, but this is what I have been finding out, but maybe it's more, I hope.
Well, it may be more, but I would suggest then if it was 1% when they did that assessment, it might not be significantly more. And I'm just wondering if that's a reflection of, Latino communities' evaluation of mental health services. In other words, that they did not choose that path because it's not seen as a high-valued service.
I think it's related to the psychologists that are involved with Latinos. I think this is what it means. The statistics are that the psychologists that go out to the Latinos. But I agree with you that first option, that's part of a public education campaign, that the first option for a Latino would not be a psychologist, because they don't know exactly what a psychologist is. They don't know the difference between what a psychologist is, a psychiatrist, or a social worker. And also, you have to take into account that religion is very, very important. So the first option may be going to the priest. The second, or at the same time, it could happen that you go to somebody that does, some kind of, I don't want to call it, but the folklore psychology, where you get all kinds of, like transpersonal psychology. So not really, they wouldn't go to evidence-based, what scientific psychology could offer, or evidence-based treatments at all. I mean, they don't have the information that exists. They don't know the difference of different types of therapies. And to begin with, it also, the feeling is that to go to a psychologist, a person is weak, a person is not, maybe thought as a crazy person. So all this kind of, the stigma involved is very high in the Latino that I am aware of.
We had that here, and there may be other parts of the country where that, mindset is still prevalent. In New York, it's not, I think, as prevalent, because there's been a push and initiative to educate the population about, mental health services and demystify psychological interventions.
With all the campaigns that you have been doing throughout the years, I'm pretty sure that what you say is correct, yes.
Is there initiatives in Latino communities or countries to engage and educate individuals on what mental health programs are and how to obtain mental health services?
Well, yes. There was, for example, I have to talk about our experience at the Venezuelan Association of Behavior Therapy. We had a grant where we were working for a whole year with a very interesting program that was given out in the subways. And we had brochures in the subways. There was a program for the prevention of violence. It is called A Truth for Venezuelans, and it's done in a very friendly way, where people get in touch very quickly in a question of minutes on different strategies on how to relax, for example, 3 steps on how to relax, 3 steps on how to communicate, 3 steps, and even it has some drawings so that people that don't know how to read will understand what the brochure is about. It's a very simple brochure that also talks about how to pay attention to the warning signs of anger, and it finishes with information on self-efficacy. Now, the interesting thing of this program that we did is not only did we have the brochures, but we did 80 workshops in all different areas, both of different socio-economic status, both in the high economic status and low economic status, and workshops on the same issue, on the treatments like teaching relaxation, teaching assertion training, teaching anger management, and teaching self-efficacy. Not only did we do that in the workshops, but we managed, and I'm very happy to share that with the public, is that we had 4 TV spots on this, the relaxation, assertion training, and self-efficacy and anger management. And also we had a radio program where we invited other NGOs that were working with the prevention of violence. So it was a very complete campaign to disseminate the prevention of violence. And we, unfortunately, to measure, because we're very interested in measuring, what we have is testimonies of people that were interviewed on TV, how they felt about the workshops they attended, and it's still being presented, and we're talking now in 2010, 11, so I think it was we're very satisfied with that input. One thing that you do is not enough in a world where we have violence in such a massive, almost, I would say, it's an epidemic, no? So,
APA and New York State Psychological Association have been clearly working for years, educating the public, and it's a work in progress. And we realize that it's going to take years and years and years of work to turn around old, fallacies and misperceptions.
Howie, I would like to add that when you say years and years, I'm not entirely in that same page with you because, if the program is, if we would change around like soap operas and we can talk about the work that Albert Bandura, who's a pioneer in social learning theory, what he is doing throughout the world is, he's not doing it, but he's assessing in different countries like Peru, Tanzania, Mexico. He started in Mexico with soap operas that made a difference in the image that, for example, in Mexico, it made a difference in how men would view women, their gender problem. And in many examples, their emphasis now is on the prevention of HIV, but if we could start having episodes both in radio, and there is a group here that is doing that also already, if we have, if we can give that information in such a friendly to use way, then maybe it doesn't take that many years. It can take years, but not so many years. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can see it in our lifetime if it would be a massive, an important, if it would be in the agenda of the political decision makers.
Well, in my book, and maybe it's just the way I say it, when I say years and years, I'm still thinking my lifetime.
Oh, good. Because I've been interviewed so many times and they say, well, maybe in I don't know how many years, and I say, well, wait, don't think it. It depends on the decision makers. It depends. The information is out there in the universities, in the behavioral experimental laboratories, and we have all this here at our fingertips. But how do we get it out there? It's more important. When you just turn on the TV and you'll see I won't mention the programs, but they get more and more, and you know that the more violence you show, the more violence people want to see because they get desensitized to seeing gory scenes, horrible scenes. And so just yesterday I was looking at a specific TV show, just zapping, because I don't really see. And I was very surprised that now, when you see somebody that you don't see them dead, just like that. You see the most gory scenes, and that because people are desensitized to violence, and you can turn this the way around because when you see that, then if you associate a violent episode with a very lovely young woman who's, she's dancing or she's in a lovely setting, then you get even more desensitized to, it's not so bad. So, the information is out there, only that, unfortunately, we don't have a collective efficacy in regard to that.
Well, unfortunately, Felicitas, we're out of time.
Yeah, well, it was a pleasure talking.
It was a pleasure talking to you. And thank you again for the information, and hope that with all our collective energies, we can help reduce violence, aggression, and anger in all the populations in the world.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast of Psychology and You, a podcast supported by New York State Psychological Association. If you have any questions about today's show or would like to contact the guest expert, you can visit our website and blog at www.nyspa.org. In addition, if you would like to have a question answered or have a suggestion for a future show, you can also contact us at www.nyspa.org.